Hello, everyone. I'm Holly Thorne, the Community Relations Coordinator for the Stormwater Quality Division here at the City of Oklahoma City. I'd like to officially welcome everyone to the August session of our 2025 webinar series. Before we begin hearing from our presenters, I'd like to provide some information to help enhance everyone's experience during today's webinar. To reduce background noise, we ask that everyone keep themselves muted during the presentation. If anyone has any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type those into chat. We will be monitoring the chat for questions, and we will have our speaker answer as many as possible. If anyone would like to receive a certificate of today's attendance for this webinar, please send us a request via email. We will place my email into the chat, so you'll have it handy. Each of our recorded webinars will be available on our website as well as the OKC's YouTube channel. We'll post a link to the webpage where you can find those recordings toward the end of today's session. If anyone has any questions at this time, please feel free to type them into chat now. Up next is the presentation for today's session. Today, we are pleased to welcome Jimmy Greene with Power Engineers with his presentation, Strategies and Challenges of Implementing an Industrial Stormwater Compliance Program for Multiple Facilities. Jimmy Greene is a project manager and environmental specialist with over 9 years of experience in stormwater, permitting and compliance, spill prevention, control, and countermeasure, SPCC compliance, environmental auditing, recycling and waste minimization, and environmental compliance training. His consulting experience has spanned over 18 states and has involved assisting a wide variety of clients, including electrical transmission and generation utilities, municipalities, concrete and cement plants, quarries and mines, manufacturing facilities, and oil and gas operations. Again, if anyone has any questions during today's presentation, be sure to type them into chat. Jimmy will be available at the end of the presentation to answer any questions. Jimmy, I'll hand the reins over to you. You may share your screen and begin your presentation.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I will go ahead and share my screen. Let me know when it is visible.
I can see your screen just fine.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining today's session. I'm pleased to be able to present today. I'm coming to you from San Antonio. That's where I live. But I've done a decent amount of work in the Oklahoma area, and I'm excited to connect with you. So as it was mentioned, today we're going to be covering the strategies and challenges of implementing an industrial stormwater compliance program. But the goal is to target that from a company or an organization that potentially has multiple facilities, because that's a common challenge that I've encountered with some of the clients that I work with. There's an overview before we dig into some of the compliance challenges and strategies. Before that, I want to talk about some of the compliance best management practices and what goes into having a quality stormwater compliance program. So we'll go ahead and over the next few slides break into that. And associated with the programs that we help to build, we believe that there's five key components, and that's going to be training, inspections, monitoring, record keeping, and ultimately reporting. It's important to note that while each of those tasks must be completed, they're not mutually exclusive of the others. And a SWIP, or a stormwater pollution prevention plan, it's considered a living document, and it's something that should be continuously updated to reflect the ever-changing site conditions and practices that a facility might have. So all of these different elements will kind of link together in some capacity. But to start, one of the most important is training. In addition to actually completing the training, it's crucial that you document it, and you must maintain that record to show that training took place. Typically with training, there's two types of employees that need training at a site. The first is going to be those employees that are not directly responsible for maintaining or implementing activities related to the compliance with the MSGP and the SWIP. And on the other side of that, it's the ones that are the employees that implement the activities necessary to comply with the MSGP and the SWIP. It's important that all employees are provided some sort of training, but you can specialize the training depending on what the individual's role is. So if your office has somebody that works at the front and they're greeting people and helping with security, they probably do not need to know when you're required to submit a report to the state, but they should understand that you do have a stormwater plan in place. And if they notice a spill, they should know who to contact. While the other individual will need to know all the necessary requirements. And that would be somebody who would be considered a part of the pollution prevention team. You might see it on my slides referred to as a P2 member. And so that's a pollution prevention team member. This next slide, this covers some common information that will typically be found within adequate training. You should cover proper material management and the handling practices for specific chemicals, fluids, or other materials that are used or encountered on a site. Spill prevention methods, locations of materials and equipment necessary for a spill cleanup, and proper spill cleanup techniques, whether an individual needs to use a dry method such as a broom, or if there's spill absorbent pads that can be used. All the different factors that go into a proper spill cleanup. Additionally, proper spill reporting procedures. And the last common one is going to be familiarization with good housekeeping measures, the best management practices on site, and the ultimate goal of your SWIP. So those are some high-level things that should be included within your training. The next category is inspections that need to be a part of your stormwater program. It's important to note that inspections must be performed by a qualified person. And referring to the MSGP, it's defined that a qualified personnel is a person who is knowledgeable in the principles and practices of industrial stormwater control and pollution prevention. That individual also possesses the education and ability to assess conditions at the industrial facility that could impact stormwater quality. And they have the education and ability to assess the effectiveness of stormwater control selected and installed to meet the requirements of the permit. So whoever is conducting the inspections, they must understand what their requirements are and understand the program. You can't just have somebody fill in and complete an inspection. They should be qualified to be able to do to meet those requirements to do it. Traditionally, it's going to be the inspection should be completed by a P2 member, or at least have a P2 team member a part of it. The record of the inspection, the corrective actions, and any follow-up needs to be documented and maintained. And those records need to be maintained for at least 3 years. It's important to note, while I do call out the 3-year time period, if a company has more stringent requirements, or if there's another preceding requirement for the site requiring them to have a longer time period, please meet whatever is the most strict time period. The inspection frequency is driven by the permit conditions, so there could be changing in the frequency depending on your practice, the industrial practices, and what the sector is for the site, but they're typically at least quarterly. In addition to those quarterly inspections, there is an annual comprehensive site compliance inspection that is also required of a facility. Here are some of the key areas that should be reviewed when an inspection is taking place. Should be any areas where industrial materials or activities are exposed to stormwater, any potential pollutant source areas, areas where spills have occurred, your outfall locations, that's locations where water is leaving your site and discharging, your stormwater control measures, and then lastly would be sector-specific items. So for example, if you have any waste storage areas, processing, disposal areas exposed to stormwater that have additional requirements based off your sector. It is important to note that It's not always a violation if you see a problem whenever you're doing an inspection, but it is a violation to not correct it. So you should document those. And whenever you're reporting or documenting an inspection, try to be objective, specific, and measurable in the terms of identifying what the problem is, or what the site needs to do for its improvement. And whenever you put a corrective action, we recommend that you assign an individual to actually complete it. You document when it must be completed, and you maintain all of those records. As the common saying is, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So please make sure to keep records. This next element that we're going to cover is monitoring. And there's 3 common monitoring requirements. This includes visual monitoring, annual NEL, numeric effluent limitation monitoring, or impaired waters monitoring. There's potentially additional monitoring outside of that, but those are the ones that we're going to cover over the next few slides. So the first one would be the quarterly visual assessment. This is a qualitative examination of your discharge. So it's not quantitative. You don't get any lab results back. This is where you're going to take a visual assessment of the water, and you're going to determine if there's any potential pollutants just by determining what the color, the odor, clarity, if there's any floating material in it, or settled or suspended solids. Is there a foam, a sheen? Pretty much write down everything you can associated with the water in your descriptions, minus tasting it. Don't taste the water, but document everything else you can associated with the water. It's important to note that sampling needs to occur within 30 minutes of the discharge of a qualifying rain event. And for a storm event, it should be for a discharge that occurs from a storm that is greater than 0.1 inches in magnitude of rain. And it should not have a preceding measurable storm event that was at least 72 hours prior. So there needs to be at least a 3-day gap between rain events for it to be considered a qualifying rain event for the site. It should be conducted quarterly. There is some varying frequencies depending on what's written into the permit, but the last thing is also just to make sure you document it. You need to maintain those records. The next type of sampling that I'd like to cover is numeric effluent limitation, also referred to as NEL monitoring. This is a quantitative monitoring requirement. So you will get lab results associated with this sample that is taken. This is a sector-specific requirement. And so an example would be if you have runoff of material storage piles at a cement manufacturing facility. There's an NEL associated with that, and so you need to sample to make sure you are meeting the requirements. If you do have an exceedance associated with the parameters that are written into the permit, this would be considered non-compliance. And the site will need to do corrective actions to try to limit that pollutant in the future. The last one I listed on there was discharges to impaired waters. This is something that's written into the MSGP for a requirement for sampling, but I've also included 2 other ones that we have seen for some sites. This could be potentially if you have any tribal provisions that are associated with the area where your facility is located, or if you have any additional EPA adjustments that have been put in place for your site. The last category that we're going to talk about is record keeping. And so for common records, you would have your rain gauge or a representative monitoring station, a log of spills and leaks, your preventative maintenance that's conducted on site, your list of all of your inspections and the corrective actions that came associated with that, your training logs, the information that you provided during training, any reporting, as well as your monitoring. And it's important to note, as I mentioned earlier, you have typically at least a 3-year retention requirement for all of your documents. And I misspoke when I said that I was covering the last one. This is actually the last one, reporting. This is the fifth and final element of a program that we believe makes a quality stormwater program. But for reporting, please refer to the MSGP to make sure that you target everything, but I've highlighted some of the top ones. So please report all of the monitoring requirements that are listed in part 4.2 of the MSGP, and you can electronically submit those using the eDMR tool that is available on the DEQ's website. Additionally, if you discharge stormwater associated with industrial activity through a regulated MS4, you must also submit signed copies of your DMR to the operator of the MS4. Potentially, your annual comprehensive site compliance evaluation report will need to be reported. This is if it's requested by the DEQ. Additionally, there's exceedance reports for numeric effluent limitations. This needs to be no later than 30 days after you've received your laboratory results. And written within the permit, in section 7.5, there are some additional parameters that require reports to be submitted. So I recommend referring to that section of the permit to see if any of those are applicable to your facility. Now that we've covered some of the information for a site to have a quality stormwater program in place, I want to discuss some of the challenges that I commonly see for companies or operations that have several facilities. The first challenge that I would like to talk about is the challenge of maintaining consistency. Unfortunately, each facility may be subject to different local, state, and federal environmental regulations depending on where they're located. So keeping up with that and ensuring compliance with these varying regulations can be pretty daunting for companies. Additionally, each location may have a different industrial process. So if they have different SIC codes, then they potentially have different requirements associated with their permit and what they need to be doing. So this can make it challenging for standardizing your procedures at a site or among your different sites. Additionally, geography plays a large factor for companies. So large areas reduce what can be done within any given amount of time, and that can especially have a challenge if you're trying to sample multiple locations during a storm event. That then will require you to have multiple people trained to be able to do that in order to meet the requirements to sample all the locations. Additionally, multiple facilities typically will require additional staff to be trained. That also goes back to collecting those samples, but completing your inspections, maintaining your records, and all of the requirements that we previously discussed. The next challenge that I'd like to discuss is effective communication and coordination. Communication about environmental policies and compliance measures can become fragmented when you have multiple sites. Ensuring that all employees are aware and adhere to those environmental standards require a robust communication channel within an organization, depending on the size of it. Additionally, and this is something we see fairly common in the San Antonio area at some of the sites that I work for, is often a language barrier. And so this can cause confusion and misunderstanding. And so my recommendation is if you work for a site where you're assisting a facility that has people that speak different languages, try whatever you can do to provide proper training, whether you have an individual that can speak as a translator involved in those trainings to make sure everybody is on the same page and they know what to do in the event there's a spill or how to clean up an area. And if you have individuals on the pollution prevention team that speak different languages, it might be necessary to have additional inspection forms created with multiple languages So that way everybody is meeting the permit requirements and hitting all of the objectives. Another big challenge is resource allocation. Distributing resources such as budget, equipment, and personnel for environmental initiatives and compliance requirements is commonly a big challenge. Each facility may have completely different environmental priorities and needs. One site, maybe they need to have a detention pond put on site, while another one needs a larger secondary containment area installed. And if you're working with a company with potentially limited budget, it's hard to pick which one you're going to tackle first. And so utilizing that resource allocation can be a significant challenge for some sites. And the last challenge that I commonly see is it has to do with training awareness. Different sites may have different varying levels of awareness and also commitment to the environmental goals. So I've seen it where a site has one person that's trying to handle everything on their own, which is commonly a recipe for disaster. Because if that person is sick or if they have another task that's on their plate, it can slip through the cracks, and then you have deficiencies in your compliance. Additionally, I've also seen it where a site has multiple people trying to handle the compliance requirements, but none of them are fully trained on what they should be doing, or they don't know the reason why they have to do it. And so ultimately they end up missing the mark as well. And so not having proper training awareness is a big one to cause some issues for a site. So now that we've covered some of the challenges, I want to break into some of the strategies to how to overcome that. And once we finish this presentation, I know it was mentioned that we'll have a Q&A opportunity, but I hope if there's any information that you guys can provide to each other, whether that's in the chat or if there's the opportunity to come off mute and speak to the audience, provide impact or input on strategies if there's information that I have not included within this. But the first strategy, I think it's so important for companies to define their goals. Provide goals and your goals will provide a clear direction and focus for the company. This will help to align the efforts of all the employees towards the common objectives. And there's so many goals out there that a company might have, but ones that come to mind is maintaining compliance, just having the outright goal of checking every box you're supposed to for the permit and doing everything appropriately. Hopefully that's a goal for most, but even starting with that baseline goal, it should be incorporated for sites. Additionally, some sites might have larger goals, like having water quality improvement for their facility, or potentially implementing a capital investment project. So constructing that stormwater retention pond at the facility and acquiring the funding to be able to do that. The next thing I suggest is working on aligning your culture. So aligning culture can help with consistent decisions and actions. Companies and teams that can define and communicate their core values are typically more successful. And ways that we found to properly align a culture is to lead by example. Implementing your program properly and showing individuals the way you're supposed to doing it by actually being boots on the ground and implementing it will go a long way into having other people buy into the process to clean up a spill whenever they see it, and make change on site. In addition, we believe that you should foster open communication. Everybody needs to be involved to have a site work properly and prevent releases from occurring from your facility. So open communication, having people be able to communicate what challenges they're having, will lead you to having a more successful outcome. And then the last thing is recognizing and rewarding alignment. I used to, before I switched over to Power Engineers, I used to work for some manufacturing facilities in the Midwest. And at the manufacturing sites, I found an easy way to get buy-in by people was just giving recognition for people doing the small things. We had an individual that he was a barrel operator, and he could move barrels across the site of oil. And typically that's a higher risk area for a potential spill. But by getting him to be a part of the process and take more ownership of kind of his responsibility, it led to more successful outcomes and quicker spill response because he felt like he was a part of the team, and instead of just an individual that was maybe previously people kind of treated him below the requirement and didn't bring him up to the same level of ownership of his abilities. And so providing recognition, and if someone's doing a great job, providing a reward for that. The next key thing I highly recommend is understand the regulatory environment. Companies should determine their compliance requirements and identify if there are any gaps. So some of the suggestions I have are attending trainings and workshops, whether that's a presentation like today, or if you have the ability to go to a conference or a lunch and learn, something to get people involved in and understanding where the regulations are currently at, where they're potentially going in the future, is only going to allow facilities to be more prepared to handle the requirements. In addition, I recommend, when possible, engaging with industrial associations. So if there's potentially a manufacturing organization that's in your local area, or if there is a stormwater control association that is operating in your area, get involved with those groups and try to understand what you can do to make an impact back at your site by being involved in those. And then the last one, which is commonly overlooked, which is unfortunate, I highly recommend engaging with regulators. I think there's a typical stigma that people don't want to reach out to regulators because they're afraid that they're going to get more compliance issues or they're going to end up on somebody's radar. Almost every regulator I've ever met, they just want to help. So if you reach out and you ask a question and you're asking for assistance, they want to make your site better. They want to help in the process, and traditionally they're not going to slap you on the wrist associated with an issue if you're asking for help and you're trying to do the right thing. In addition to that, if you're very weary on reaching out to a regulator, you can also just do a blind call and ask for help, give a scenario and ask for assistance. But also, if you just ask on behalf of your company, most regulators are willing to help and get you out of a situation because they want you to be improving. The next thing that I would like to address is utilizing technology. This can definitely increase efficiency and productivity, and in many situations, it may provide cost savings. So some examples is utilizing a project management system. This is an automated reminder system that will allow for, you can log in all of your compliance requirements at the beginning of the year, and then it will give you required timelines for getting those completed. Instead of using something like Outlook or just a standard calendar for one individual, I would recommend having a more robust project management system that multiple people can access, and it gives you reminders and tracks your corrective actions and everything that the site is doing. I know some sites, they potentially have a limited budget, and so getting another tool might be challenging, but I think there are creative ways to overcome that. And so one thing that I commonly see at sites, if they don't necessarily have an environmental personnel on staff that we're assisting, if we bring up this project management system, they don't want to pay for a new tool, but we commonly find that they already have a similar tool that they use for their maintenance logs. So there's something that they're already tracking when they need to repair a piece of equipment or change an oil on a piece of a machine. And often with a few tweaks on how you put the data into the system, you can utilize the same tool and not have to pay for a secondary one. So there's many things out there that sites potentially have. If you get creative, you can find potentially a free opportunity to better track your data. In addition to that, I highly recommend, if possible, trying to do digital inspections. One of the benefits of that is you get a timestamp. So you know when it was completed, so it avoids the potential mishap of individual at a site pencil whipping an inspection if they forgot it, because you have a timestamp when it was actually completed. And one of the best things is you're less likely to lose that file. Typically it's backed up, and so you're not relying on a paper file that potentially gets misplaced or put in the wrong location. One thing that I recommend for sites, if they're looking at moving into the digital inspections, is to understand whether you want to incorporate photos or you don't. And if it's a permit requirement for a certain thing, making sure that you meet your company needs and your ultimate goals of what type of data the company wants to incorporate associated with your inspections. The next category that I'd like to discuss is training your employees. It's so important because companies need to rely on more than just the environmental staff to maintain your compliance. And ultimately, having the training will help the company meet their goals. So some examples of training: I believe you should work on having customized training programs. So tailor the training session to the specific role and responsibility of the person. It's typically more engaging if people are attending a session that's applicable to what they actually do in their job versus a standard PowerPoint that maybe goes to the entire company and 90% of it's not applicable for what you do for your job. More likely to have people zone out and potentially miss stuff that actually is important whenever it gets to their parts. In addition to that, I highly recommend interactive workshops. Use hands-on workshops to discuss challenges with people. And so one example, I talked earlier about the manufacturing site that I worked at and getting individuals involved with transfer of oil throughout the facility. But another thing that we targeted was properly training people how to use absorbents. So at my facility, we had multiple different types of absorbents that were on site. Some were designed for oils, some were designed for water, and some were designed for acids. And so it helped to neutralize the acid on the ground for the spill cleanup process. But the unfortunate thing is we had some individuals, they would see a spill and they wouldn't know which absorbent to use because they're just different colors. And unfortunately, the model we had didn't say like for acid or for oil or for water. And so they didn't know what to do, and they would often either just walk away from the situation and wait for somebody else who knew what to do it, or they would use the wrong type of material. And they would be putting down ones that are designed for water to try to clean up oil, and it's ineffective, and you're spending a lot of money on a tool that's not doing a good job. And so training people to do that dramatically increased our spill response, and people felt way more comfortable on that procedure moving forward. And then the last thing for training employees, you need to engage with leadership. The leadership within the organization needs to understand what the permitting requirements are and what the goals are. Upper management needs to buy into the process ultimately to be to have an effective program. Otherwise, it's going to be so much harder to get that capital investment when the time comes, if something is actually necessary for the site, or to work on training requirements and having people take a 30-minute break from their standard work schedule to be trained on how to do spill response. And the last category that I want to cover associated with helping a site is to actually monitor your compliance. If you do not monitor the compliance, how do you know if a site is doing what it's needed or if it's even improving? So some examples, I highly suggest conducting a gap analysis or performing an audit to evaluate the effectiveness of your compliance requirements. This is something that sites can do either internal on their own, or you can hire somebody and have an external individual come and perform a gap analysis or an audit. Additionally, if you choose to do an internal gap analysis, if it's possible, if you have multiple sites, try to have individuals from another facility audit the other site. So you have individuals with a different perspective or different set of eyes that are looking for compliance gaps. I think it's a great educational tool because they can share knowledge from their site, but then also learn about the challenges that maybe another site is struggling with and help to work together to overcome that. And then lastly, I highly recommend doing routine checks of your management system. So if you're logging all of that information into the database that we talked about, routinely check that. Don't just click a button and log out of it. Because the last thing you want to do is find out it's Q3 and you realize the site hasn't done any inspections. So you need to routinely monitor your compliance, make sure you're doing what you need to do, and then document that and have that source of information for your records. But I would like to thank you for taking the time to join for my presentation today. I look forward to chatting if you guys have any questions, but more importantly, if you guys have any information that you would like to share with the group based off your experience on ways to improve compliance management system for multiple facilities, please put that in the chat, or if it's possible to come off mute, please do that.
Thank you, Jimmy. Great presentation. If anyone has any questions for Jimmy, please be sure to put them into chat at this time. I think we do have a few, so I'm gonna hand it over to Jordan, and she'll get y'all started.
Thanks, Holly. Jimmy, we do have a few questions. The first one is if you have a recommendation possibly for a project management software that you've seen and used by facilities, or kind of open it up to anybody else in the webinar today if they're familiar with a software.
Yeah, so for a free software, or free, assuming your company uses Outlook, there's a tool called Planner, which is really good for tracking. It's typically used for project management, but it's a really easy way to put in a reoccurring task. Yeah, so that's Planner, Planner. If your company uses Outlook, it's typically a free add-on. It's been a while since I've looked at some of the maintenance software. I'm happy to send you an email, Jordan, if you would like to share that after the fact. I can look for some different recommendations to provide.
Yeah, that would be really wonderful. I'm sure that would probably be a great resource for other people on the webinar today.
Perfect.
Thank you.
I'd be happy to do that. And then the second question I can see, it says about different absorbents. Is this typical, or is this a common mistake if facilities not having different type of absorbents available? I do think for some manufacturing sites, it is common to have different types of absorbents. It's typically if you have any sort of acid involved in your process, whether that's the site I was at, it was a manufacturing for agricultural equipment. And we had a lot of batteries that occasionally they would drop and break open. And you can either use a powder form to neutralize that before the cleanup and use a standard absorbent, but it's typically seen as safer if you can just use a single absorbent that has a neutralizing powder built into it. But we would have people use those on a water spill, and the neutralizing ones are way more expensive. And unfortunately, the companies that made them at the time when I was doing that, they were not branded any different. It was just a slightly different color. And so if people weren't trained to do that, or if we didn't have the proper labeling on a drum or a spill kit location, the wrong ones were used. But it's typically, if a site has multiple types of chemicals, that's when it's going to become more prevalent.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Holly, I think that was all the questions that we had right now, but Everybody, you're welcome to enter any questions while we kind of wrap up a few housekeeping items.
Absolutely. And remember, if anyone would like to receive a certificate of attendance for today's presentation, please send that via email. My email is in the chat if you need it. We are placing my email into the chat again. We do ask that we don't request certificates in the chat because we may not know your email address linked to your username on Teams. I'll send out those certificates probably tomorrow, later this week. As we've mentioned, a recording of today's presentation should be available in the next week or so, and we will put that on the website link, and we will put that website link into the chat for you now. While we are adding my email and the link to that webinar page in chat, I would like to share an important resource that is available to you. One of the most common questions our staff receive is, how can I report an environmental issue like a spill? If you witness a spill or anything really that could be a threat to the environment, we encourage you to report it by calling OKC's Action Center. The Action Center can receive reports in a lot of different ways. So if you don't want to call in, you can also send in your concern by email, text, or even Twitter. These concerns are then sent directly to us so our team can respond and investigate. Before we wrap up today, we would love to receive your feedback, so please complete our brief survey by scanning the QR code now shown on your screen. And while you are doing that, I would like to invite everyone back for our next webinar, October 21st. We will be hearing from David Chase with Skybridge Construction about a case study on long-term stormwater management at the Rose Creek Plaza project. Until then, we thank you all for attending today's session and hope you have a great afternoon.
Yeah, I still don't see any additional questions, Holly. But Jimmy, thank you so much for being our speaker today. We really appreciate you.
Of course, thanks for having me involved.
Jimmy, this is Rebecca Dallin. Thank you also. Just wanted to put my 2 cents in as well.
Thanks so much.